Joan Lucinda Webster was the youngest child of George and Eleanor Webster, a well-off family from Glen Ridge, New Jersey. Bright and ambitious, Joan had already begun making a name for herself as a student. At just 25 years old, she was pursuing a master's degree in urban planning at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Friends described her as gentle, talented, and determined to excel in her field. Her life seemed carefully charted toward a promising future. That future was abruptly cut short on the evening of November 28, 1981. Joan had flown home to New Jersey for Thanksgiving with her family, and that Saturday she boarded an Eastern Airlines shuttle back to Boston. The flight from Newark to Logan Airport was uneventful. Around 10:30 p.m., she was last seen at the baggage claim area inside Logan. Witnesses later recalled a man approaching Joan and speaking with her, possibly offering her a ride. Investigators would later consider this encounter critical, as it may have been the last time anyone saw her alive. When Joan did not return to her Harvard dormitory or make contact with friends, alarm spread quickly. She was reported missing within days. On December 2nd, just 4 days after her disappearance, a fisherman discovered Joan's pocketbook and wallet in a marsh along Route 107 in Saugus, about 10 miles north of Logan. The discovery prompted an intensive search. Investigators combed the marsh and surrounding areas, but there was no sign of Joan herself. Soon after, her suitcase was located in a locker at the Greyhound bus terminal in downtown Boston. The suitcase, carefully stowed away, raised more questions than it answered. Her disappearance captured national attention, both because of her family's status and because of the mystery surrounding the case. Her father, George, was a wealthy corporate executive, and her family pushed hard for answers. The FBI joined the investigation, alongside Massachusetts State Police and local authorities. But months passed without resolution. In early 1983, investigators received information from a prison informant. The informant claimed that Joan had been struck in the head and sexually assaulted before being killed. While this account was never substantiated with physical evidence, authorities treated it as a serious lead. Still, with no body and no direct witness testimony, the investigation stalled. For the Webster family, the years dragged on. They never stopped pressing for answers. Joan's sister-in-law, Eve Carson, in particular, remained publicly outspoken for decades, publishing writings that criticized how the case had been handled. She alleged that evidence had been overlooked and suspects mishandled. The family's persistence kept Joan's name in the public eye long after most cases might have faded. Then, in April 1990, nearly 9 years after Joan vanished, the grim discovery was made. Human remains were found buried off Chabaco Road in a wooded area of Hamilton, Massachusetts, about 30 miles north of Logan Airport. Dental records confirmed that the remains were Joan's. Her skull bore signs of blunt force trauma, consistent with a violent attack. However, the advanced state of decomposition made it impossible to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted or to establish a precise cause of death. Suspicion eventually focused on a man named Leonard Paradiso, who in 1984 had been convicted of murdering another young woman, Marie Iannuzzi, in an unrelated case. Investigators considered Paradiso a likely suspect in Joan's murder. Circumstantial evidence tied him to violent crimes in the same era, and some law enforcement officials privately expressed their belief that he was responsible for Joan's death. Paradiso himself denied involvement, and although Joan's family believed he was the killer, no charges were ever brought against him. Paradiso died in prison in 2008, leaving the case without resolution. For the Websters, the lack of closure was devastating. They knew their daughter had been murdered, but never saw anyone held accountable in court. Their anguish was compounded by lingering doubts about how thoroughly the case had been pursued. Even today, the case of Joan Webster is officially unsolved. Her story is one of heartbreak and unanswered questions. A gifted architecture student flew back to Boston after Thanksgiving, was last seen near her luggage at Logan Airport, and then simply vanished. Days later, her belongings turned up in strange places: a marsh in Saugus, a locker at a bus terminal. 9 years later, her remains were uncovered in a remote wooded area, and investigators concluded she had been murdered. Yet, despite decades of inquiry, no one has ever stood trial for her death. It remains a haunting case. A young woman with a bright future cut down suddenly. Her family left with decades of grief and uncertainty. For all of the theories, suspects, and investigations, the truth of what happened to Joan Webster has never been officially established. And so her case lingers in the long, troubling list of American mysteries, where the victim is known, but the answers are not.